Dzień dobry.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome
znowu z panów analityków,
those of you,
którzy zaszczycili
gentlemen,
nas
the analysts
kobiety nie skorzystały z zaproszenia
who've taken our
z
invitation.
marca, niestety,
Ladies,
ale
I'm afraid, have not
jednak oglądają nas
taken our invitation
w internecie.
issued in March, but I hope they're watching us online.
Spotykamy się po
This way or
wydaniu
other,
finansowej operacyjnej
we're
pierwszego kwartału
meeting
2018 roku.
to present the financial and operating results for Q1 2018, and traditionally with us are Mr. Henryk Baranowski, CEO, and Mr. Emil Wojtowicz, CFO. My name is Kuba Freilich, Investor Relations Director. Traditionally, we present the presentation to you, then we'll give the floor over to those who wish to ask the questions here, and then we'll take some questions online. Since there's no press conference today, journalists can also ask the questions. So without further ado, over to you, Mr. President. Without further ado, welcome everyone in this room, as well as those watching us online. We're starting our conference presenting the results, and it's our great pleasure to start with to inform you that we can boast of an EBITDA level above 2 billion zlotys and 1 billion in net profit. The assets taken over by us have contributed to this significantly. The EDF assets, which confirms how advantageous for our group was an efficient taking over of this transaction. The new assets support our market position, which is substantiated by our operating results. We've increased our energy generation to 17.7 terawatt hours. That's to say 18% more than last year. We've tripled the sales of heat to 23.5 petajoules. This is almost just as much as we sold throughout the entire year 2017. Also, the 5% increase in energy sold to end consumers is connected with the new customers of PGE Group serviced by PGE Energia Ciepła. We've been consistently managing to increase the distribution volume of electricity. Last year was better by 3% in this respect. During our previous meeting, in the annual results presentation, we've presented the opportunities in the light of the power gen transformation. One of the pillars is the growth of district heating. Half a year passed since the announcement of the district heating strategy, and today I would like to take this opportunity to discuss what we've been able to do over those couple of months. First of all, we've been focusing on the integration of the generation assets acquired within the group. It takes a lot of administrative and organizational work, which, as we believe, will be building the group's value going forward. PGE Energia Ciepła company is, among others, implementing the ethical code of PGE Group and the anti-corruption policy connected with it. Just as important is the asset integration in the operating sphere. We've been implementing many PGE Group policies so that the new assets could function based on the same principles. Here I can also see the potential for taking the best practices to apply to the assets acquired. This will allow us to achieve the desirable synergies, the flow of the best practices both ways. We also expect, naturally, we've been observing all the power generation assets and comprehensively analyzing their growth potential. On the one hand, this is the possibility of growing new cogeneration capacities or replacing the so-far generation assets with low emission and more efficient assets. On the other hand, this involves a more efficient environment involvement in seeking better heat distribution locations where we're present, or possibilities of offering additional services. The economy of activities is very important. That's why we're trying to optimize the cost connected with the refits. We're looking at this from the perspective of our consumers, expecting the infallible ensuring of heat comfort at as acceptable and as advantageous a price as possible. We wish to dynamically implement the strategy. These are real ideas, real projects to consolidate our position in the heat market. Last year, we supported the launching of the gas and steam unit in Gorzów. Today, I can talk about the thermal processing plant, waste to energy in Rzeszów. This is a good example to show you how we can take the advantages to the benefit of the local residents. We're convinced that the implementation of this installation in the light of the changing regulations about waste is one of those business opportunities that PGE Group wishes to take. We're facing the challenges that local communities face. Our approach ensures the balancing of the investors' interest as well as those of local communities, both from the ecological as well as financial point of view. In Rzeszów, we've gone through a coal-based heat and power plant to launch a gas and steam unit in 2003, and 9 years later complemented with an engine and gas unit. We believe that soon we will commission a new source, being part of the circular economy. This is also a direction which we indicated in our district heating or heat generation strategy, diversified fuel mix, with economically feasible. Next projects which are to be implemented is, first of all, the heat and power generation Czechnica, ensuring the maintenance of heat provision to our existing and new customers in the Wrocław metropolis. We're also commenting similar, although smaller scale projects in Bydgoszcz and Kielce, and of course we wish to generate heat in the Rybnik power plant, as well as implementing a lot of various investments limiting our environmental footprint. As we take bold plans in the district heating distribution, we are happy to make sure that this is a project to support cogeneration. Importantly, from the business point of view, this is aligned to what we assumed as we developed the district heating strategy. We hope that the support plan will be an impulse to develop cogeneration, providing a guarantee to an efficient energy use and clean air in towns and cities. As usual, we discuss our strategic projects. Like I mentioned, the implementation of the district heating strategy of the group is one of the pillars of our support to our reliable energy generation of tomorrow. The other one is the efficient power gen, conventional power gen. In this respect, we are carrying out the projects in Opole and Turów, being part of the strategy. The work progress in Opole amounts to 91%. The capex have amounted so far to 8.4 billion zlotys. As we informed in March, the general contractor declared new dates of commissioning both units. Hence, we have some shifts in the payment schedule, which you can see also in the capex implementation of the projects. On the site, work is being continued. The next stages and milestones are achieved. On Unit 5, the cold run is being implemented. Startup run. Then the other project in Turów, here the work progress reported as work progress on the investment side represents roughly 56%. The capex of the project have amounted 1.5 billion zloty so far. After winter, the work was resumed on building a cooling tower as well as work on the desulfurization and carbonization circuit. As you can see, in terms of investments of capex, a lot is going on in PGE. We believe a lot of good is going on. Not only are we building new units, but also refitting and modernizing the assets to new environmental standards. We are additionally analyzing and seeking new possibilities being part of the PGE group as well as district heating strategy. At this moment, I'd like to give the floor over to Mr. Wojtowicz, who will present the group's financial and operating results. Good morning. I'll pass through the operating and financial results, starting with discussing the energy market. Q1 is a next quarter where we've seen the energy use by roughly 3%. That's a converse relationship with regard to the generation. The relationships between Poland and the related market have been such that import has prevailed, contrary to Q1 2017. This year, imports were greater by 1.5 terawatt-hours, greater than the exports. As regards the prices, we've all been observing a significant price increase, which is definitely connected with the increase in the CO2 emission prices. The average price for 2019 was of 186 zlotys in Q2. Since April the 1st, it's been roughly 208. Those prices are increasing as the CO2 prices are increasing. They have even surpassed 210 zlotys. The next factor is the expected hard coal price increases. As we discussed, the volumes and the sources we've been using to generate energy, we can distinctly see the impact of the transaction of purchasing the assets from EDF. You can see it significantly by the increase in the bar, which indicates the hard coal-based generation, the taking over of Rybnik, or the next power and heat generation, hard coal-fired ones. We've also seen increase in the gas-based production, gas-based generation in such units as power and heat generation Toruń or Zielona Góra. Here we can observe a decrease in lignite-fired production because of the refits that have been going on both in Turów as well as Bełchatów. As regards the financial data, as Mr. President has said, EBITDA above 2 billion zlotys, recurring EBITDA 2.2 billion, that's an increase by 17%, despite the fact that this was a quarter where we
brunatnym, czyli na tym
generated
naszym
less
bardziej
based on
zyskownym
lignite, the most
paliwie, to
profitable
wynik
fuel,
był lepszy. Oczywiście
the results
wtedy
was
jest to
better.
udział
Of
nabytych
course,
aktywów, jest to
the assets required have a significant had a
około
significant
400
contribution here, about
milionów,
408
408 milionów
million
w
PLN in
segmencie energetyki
just the
konwencjonalnej,
conventional
paręnaście milionów
energy
innych
generation
segmentach, czyli
segment,
około
and
430
about
milionów.
430
To
million
jest co
is what
przyniosły nam nabyte
has been
aktywa.
contributed to us by the assets acquired.
W OSD
In terms
jest
of
to stabilny
OSD,
segment,
this is
tam
a stable segment,
EBITDA są
so the
niewielkie,
EBITDA
tylko
changes
kilka
are
procent.
insignificant by several
W obrocie
percentage points.
wyniki
In terms
gorsze,
of
co
distribution,
spowodowane było tym, że
a little bit
pierwszy
less
kwartał
so,
tamtego roku był
which
bardzo
meant
dobry.
that
tym
last year was very
kwartale
good. This quarter,
pozycja otwartych i zamkniętych
the open and
pozycji
closed
w
positions,
obrocie była nieco inna przy wzroście.
well, the position in terms of open and closed positions was slightly different, and given the increase in the spot prices, this translated into weaker results, but this was recovered in the conventional power generation segment because
grupy ta energia
it's all mitigated on a group level, so this energy is derived by our group from our generation sources. As regards renewable energies,
poprawa wyników,
we're talking about an increase in the results, one of the key
cen energii tutaj
factors being the energy prices.
nie jest
The energy
kosztem
prices are not
CO2,
laden
przekłada
with
wprost na
CO2
poprawę
prices, so it translates directly
Także
to an
wyższe
increase
ceny
in the
praw
results.
majątkowych
Also,
i
the
wyższe
higher
przychody
rights
regulacyjnych
prices
usług
and high
systemowych.
results in the regulatory systemic
Gdy spojrzymy na
services. As we take a look
EBITDA, widzimy wzrost o
at the
około
EBITDA,
200,
we're talking about an increase by about
około 300 milionów.
300 million.
EBIT już nieco
EBIT
mniej wzrósł, ponieważ
grew a little bit less
amortyzacja
because
wzrosła
depreciation
o 120
grew by
milionów, czyli
120 million,
EBIT
so EBIT in itself grew by roughly 200 million zlotys. As we go down the PLN,
dojdziemy do
we will
zysku,
reach
który jest mniej
the
więcej
profit, which is
stabilny.
roughly stable,
Milionów
200 million.
między wzrostem
Between the
EBIT-u a
EBIT
stabilnym
growth
zyskiem
and the
netto,
stable
to
net profit are first of all
brak przychodów finansowych, które
derived from
były
the
w tamtym kwartale.
lack of financial revenues that we had in the previous quarter from the for instance from the valuation of options to buy Polymix shares and the positive FX differences. Another thing is that the
roku
taxes,
były wyższe
which were
zapłacone
higher as paid this year,
wyższego udziału
and the fact of
już
a higher participation of minority shareholders
transakcji z EDF-em nie mieliśmy spółek,
until the EDF transaction. We had not had
akcjonariuszy mniejszościowi i które
any
przynosiły zyski. W tej chwili taką sytuację mamy w
companies with significant minority shareholders that they'd be
tej spółki, czy wręcz tej
profitable.
grupy.
Here we have such a situation in the case of Cogeneracja, where 40 million can be attributed to minority shareholders. Now a couple of words about the cash flow.
Netto
and the net
cash
debt.
flow operacyjny 1,7
Operating cash flow
miliarda,
was of
cash flow
1.5
inwestycyjny to wydatek
billion.
1,8
Investment
miliarda, także dług
cash
netto
flow
wzrósł o
surpassed 1.5 billion, so the net debt grew by 160
złotych. Jest
million
wskaźnik
zlotys.
dług netto do
Net debt
jest
to
wciąż
EBITDA
poniżej
is still
1.
below 1.
Jak porównamy
As we
to, co
compare
raportujemy
what we
jako
report
capex, a
as
to, co raportujemy
capex
jako
and what we report
cash
as
flow inwestycyjny, no to
investment cash flow,
słowo komentarza.
a couple
Capex
of comments.
to właściwie to,
Capex
co księgujemy jako wzrost
is actually
wartości
what we
inwestycji,
post
czyli to mówiąc
to
tak,
the increase in investment levels.
faktury
So, roughly speaking, the invoices
zapisy księgowe,
and
cash
accounting
flow
records.
inwestycyjny to
Investment
wpływ
cash flow
gotówki,
is the
czyli
outflow of
jeśli na
cash,
przełomie
which means
roku
that if
mamy
at the turn of the
faktury,
year
które
we get
płacimy w roku następnym,
invoices
to
that we pay
w
next year,
sytuacji
as it was the
powoduje
case
różnicę
this year, this
capexem
gives
a
rise to
cashflowem
differences between the
i
capex and
inwestycyjnym.
the
W
investment
roku
cash flow, and this year
była to całkiem duża pozycja.
this
To
was
było
quite a
duże
significant
kilkaset,
item. We're talking about
milionów
several
złotych.
hundred million zlotys this year.
To nie jest
So this difference
pomyłka, to po prostu jest
does
inne
not
spojrzenie
stem from
na
any
te
mistakes.
same
It is only a different
zdarzenia.
view at the same
Podsumowanie głównych
events.
czynników, które
To wrap
wpływają
up
na
the main factors
EBITDA, no to
that had an impact on the EBITDA, like I said, it was an increase
ceny o 9
in the price by 9 zlotys,
blisko spowodował wzrost EBITDA
almost
o 90
meant an increase in the EBITDA by 90 million.
zmiany w wolumenie.
The changes in the production volume
to niższa EBITDA
meant a lower EBITDA by
o 70 milionów.
70 million.
Fakt remontów w
The
Turowie
fact of performing the renovations or refits in Bełchatów and Turów meant that part of the generation volume has been allocated to Opole, and you can see this by
wyższej wartości
an increased
kosztu węgla kamiennego, tutaj 45
cost of hard coal, 45 million.
Rzeczy z dużych zmian to jest
Among the major changes,
koszt uprawnień do emisji
also the emission rates,
CO2, tutaj
CO2 emission rate costs,
wolumenu,
the increase in the volume,
wyższy koszt, niższa EBITDA o
a higher cost, lower EBITDA by 18 million
mamy
is what we're talking about,
mniej uprawnień
because we have
darmowych,
fewer free emission rights, but the decrease in the price
spadek cen uprawnień do emisji CO2
of the CO2 emissions has meant
kosztu
a decrease in the
o
cost
76
by 76
milionów.
million.
Oczywiście był to spadek
Naturally, this was a
między
decrease
latami
in the
16-17.
prices between 2016 and 17, because we're buying CO2 only when we contract the sales of
na rynek
energy
hurtowy bądź do
in the
klientów
wholesale market
końcowych.
or to end consumers.
Od spadku, marży
In terms of, as regards the
zwroty z
decrease in the retail margin is what I've already told you about.
niewielki, jest to stabilny
distribution
segment.
returns have been slight.
Kapitalizacja
This is a stable segment.
kosztów w kopalniach węgla
The cost activation
była
in
niższa w
lignite
pierwszym
mines
kwartale
was lower
ubiegłego
than
roku
in
i
Q1
to spowodowało
of the
spadek
previous year,
o
and this
25
meant a
milionów.
decrease of the EBITDA by 25 million,
największa różnica, czyli
and the
nabycie
largest
aktywów 430 milionów.
difference of
Przechodząc
413
do wskaźników
million. As regards
też,
operating ratios,
widzimy na
we can
liczbach
also
to, o czym
see
mówiłem,
by the numbers what I was talking about. A lower lignite based assets availability. This was
nadrabiane
mitigated
wykorzystaniem aktywów na węglu
by
kamiennym,
the use of hard
zwłaszcza
coal-based assets,
Opola. Tu mamy
especially
wzrost
Opole.
produkcji o
Here we're
właściwie
talking about
1/4
a generation increase by a quarter, actually, on a year-to-year basis.
aktywa
As we take a look
wiatrowe,
at
to
the
w
wind
całym
farms,
kwartale była duża zmienność. W styczniu
throughout the
była,
entire quarter there was a lot of volatility,
większa niż w roku
much
poprzednim.
higher than in the previous year.
W lutym było to
In
odwrotnie.
February it was quite conversely.
To mało wieczny miesiąc.
It was a month with very little
Marzec
wind.
był
March
lepszy niż
was, shall I
luty,
say,
ale
better than
wciąż
February, but still
niż marzec
weaker than
ubiegłego
March in the prior year.
Tutaj już też widzimy niewielką,
Here we
ale
can also see a
niewiele
slight
wyższą, ale jednak awaryjność aktywów wiatrowych.
failure rate in wind farm assets. In terms of distribution,
Wolumenu dystrybuowanej energii w ślad za
we are talking about an increase in the distributed energy volume following the higher consumption. We're also lowering the grid losses, the network losses. This is a stable trend in our distribution. SAIDI and SAIFI, as we compare it to the prior year,
jest poprawa.
we're talking about
Pogodowe
an
były
increase.
wiele lepsze, także
The weather conditions
trzymamy kciuki,
were
żeby
much
się
better,
w
so we're keeping our fingers
lecie
crossed,
i w dalszej części roku
so
ta
that in summer
tendencja
and in the next
odwróciła.
part of the year, this trend should not reverse.
Połączenia jest też stabilnie
Connection time has
poprawiane.
also been
Kilka słów
improved
o
on a stable basis.
CAPEX-ie.
A
Oczywiście
couple of words about
główny
capital
wpływ
expenditures.
na
Of course,
na
the
sumę
most important impact
CAPEX-u ma
on the
inwestycja w
capex amount
polu,
has been exerted by the Opole investment, the Opole project.
usunięcia
The shifts
harmonogramu
in the schedule
wykonania prac na
of the works performed on the facility also have an impact on the payment shifts.
w Opolu.
Hence, in Opole,
CAPEX był w tym kwartale
capex was
w
lower
roku ubiegłym w dystrybucji.
in this quarter than in the previous year. In terms of distribution, in a large area where we invest,
Podobnie jak w roku
it's
ubiegłym.
been similar to the previous year.
I patrząc do
As we
przodu, co
look
uważamy,
ahead,
że zmieniło się
what
w
we
naszym-
believe that has
w naszym
changed
postrzeganiu przyszłości, no to
in our view of the future
wzrost cen energii
is the increase in the market price of the energy,
pozycję otwartą,
with the prospect that where we still have an open position.
że dla całego roku spodziewamy się
That
średniej
means that
wyższej ceny
we're
niż
expecting
to, czego się jeszcze
an increased average price for the entire year
spodziewaliśmy.
versus what we expected in March.
Segmentów, no
For
wiele
the other segments,
nowego nie mamy, czy mniej więcej
We haven't got
utrzymujemy
any
nasze
new developments.
perspektywy.
We're maintaining our prospects.
I właściwie dziękuję.
And actually, that would be it. Thank you very much for this part.
Dziękuję za prezentację.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
Tak jak wspominałem,
Like I said, first I'm giving the floor over to our guests in the room. So, gentlemen,
The floor is yours.
the floor is yours.
Witam, Paweł Puchalski, BZWK.
Paweł Puchalski, BZ WBK. First, a trifle, which I don't fully understand. On the price about the distribution assets, it is written that the yearly targets of the regulator for SAIFI realized at the level of circa 20%. So, a quarter is 25% of the year. Is what you mean is that what you're lacking this as compared to the... Could you please clarify this? We're not missing anything.
Czy jest to wykonanie 20%
This is
tegorocznego, czyli narastające?
the performance of 20% of the annual target. So we're 5 percentage points ahead.
Zaburzone, tak?
So, but this is slightly distributed to the weather conditions. You know that the largest problems occur in May or June, at least at what we had in the previous years. Okay, and now let's pass on to the main generation assets. Of course, I congratulate you on the CO2 result, but could we please have an explanation where you derive this result from in Q1 and how the CO2 charges will look like in the ensuing quarters of this year?
Może dopytam,
Well, let me ask you an additional question
pytaniu,
about what you mean.
na CO2.
Where did you get such a result on CO2? Why is it so good? Because in public view, the CO2 prices, emission prices are growing. The free certificates number is growing. So a large power generator should have a significantly higher CO2 charges than what happened under these conditions. Well, let me remind you, when we buy CO2, once we conclude contracts with a customer, or when we sell on a wholesale basis, we sell most of our energy a year ahead. So in Q1, this was the performance of the contracts concluded throughout 2017, also partially in 16. That's when those contracts were concluded. CO2 back then was bought at the prices applicable back then at 30, 25, 28 zlotys. So the increase that we can observe this year, or the increase that we had at the end of last year, is not going to show all that much this year, because I think it started when a lot of energy had been sold and a lot of CO2 emission rights had been purchased. The increase that we can witness this year, we can observe this year, will definitely be visible in the next year. So to wrap it up, I understand that the next quarters will also be surprising us in a positive way as regards the CO2 costs. There are going to be similar trends, yes. And the last thing, You
wspomnieli
have
o
mentioned,
tym,
gentlemen,
że ceny są teraz
that
wysokie i
the
będziecie korzystać
prices are high
dzięki
now, and owing
otwartej
to
pozycji
the
na
open
wysokich cenach.
position on
Natomiast z
the
tego co pamiętam, to
high
zawsze
prices, you'll be
PGE
benefiting from this.
podkreślało
As far as I
mocno,
remember,
że to
PGE
jak
has
to, ale
always
PGE to w Polsce musi mieć sprzedaną
made
prawie
me
że całą
realize
energię
that
elektryczną.
PGE should have
Dlatego
all its
spodziewałbym się, że ta
power
otwarta pozycja u
generated
was jest
sold. That's why I should assume
relatywnie bardzo
that
niewielka.
the open position should be
Rozumiem, że
relatively
pytanie systemowe,
slight. Am I
bo
wrong?
wtedy ten
Because then
upside wynikający
that
z
upside
obecnych wysokich cen
stemming from
byłby
the
też
currently
relatywnie
high
bardzo
prices
niewielki.
would also be relatively small.
Użył określenia relatywnie bardzo niewielkie.
Well, you use the expression relatively very small. I don't know how that would translate into numbers or percentages, but I agree.
Nie wchodzimy
We
z jakąś
confirm that we
dużą
don't
otwartą pozycją, dlatego tutaj
enter a year with a major
upside,
open
który
position. That's
wskazujemy,
why the upside that we're
wyższa
showing,
cena,
I mean,
którą
the higher price
na slajdzie z perspektywą
which was shown with on the slide with the price was about 2 zlotys rather than 20 zlotys. So this increase is not very large. And the last question from me, I hope I remember well that the coal prices in Q1 this year were still contracted based on the prices derived from the previous year. So the new increased prices should come into force in March or April, starting from April. So Q1 was absolutely unaffected at the old prices, and Q2 and the next ones should be at newer prices. Well, probably also not entirely, because the new assets could have had new prices than the old price as compared to our old prices. So I should say that Q1 was a transitional one. These are not just the old prices, but there's also a large yes, there's a large proportion of old prices, yes. Thank you. Robert Potam, as we're talking about coal prices, what can we expect next year? Because this year you're talking about a 10% increase. Should we expect another 10% next year, or could it somehow be stopped? I don't think the question should be quite asked of us. We want to buy coal at market prices, but indeed we've been witnessing a lot of fluctuations upwards and downwards in the global market coal prices. And as regards PGG, you are shareholders of it. Doesn't it look like they will be demanding another price increase on the same scale? I think it's a little bit too early to speak about this. We are in the process of negotiating new prices. Could I have your comment about the most recent priorities as regards nuclear energy or offshore, and the information agencies news that you want to distance yourselves from the nuclear program? When can we expect the decisions, or will it be aligned with the ministry's positions? As of today, we have the strategy adopted in 2016, where both nuclear and offshore energy is a strategic option that we're developing. Each of those projects is developed in line with the schedule assumed and carried out since 2016, and as of today, this schedule is being performed. But as we've always said and announced it also in our strategy, we're open to all sorts of partnership
Tylko, że to
forms,
partnerstwo
except that
musi
this
mieć
partnership
racjonalne
has to
biznesowe podstawy.
have a rational,
To dwa
business-like
pytania.
basis.
Kiedy
Okay,
najwcześniej
two other questions.
mogłyby
When
powstać farmy offshore w
could
waszej, którymi
offshore
dysponujecie?
wind farms
Co
be
musiałoby się
built
wydarzyć i kiedy te farmy mogłyby
that
być
would be at your
postawione i
disposal?
działać?
What would have to
Na dzień
happen, and
dzisiejszy
when would they be
prowadzimy
up and running?
badania
As of today,
środowiskowe,
we're
badania
involved
dna
in
morskiego,
environmental
co na tym
impact
dnie leży,
research,
czy rzeczywiście tam coś
testing the
leży,
seabed,
coś
whether there is
przygotowane
anything
wiatr.
on the seabed,
Jest,
testing the
są
wind.
wszystko działania, które
These are all
zajmą nam
activities
jeszcze
that
chwilę
will
czasu.
take us
Mamy
another while.
optymistyczny i taki dosyć ambitny,
We have an optimistic and rather
plan,
ambitious place plan in place to achieve a ready-to-build status for our wind farms in 2021.
Jeśli chodzi o projekt atomowy, czy
As
ten
regards the
projekt,
nuclear
według
project,
państwa,
is this
zepnie się,
project
jeżeli nie będzie żadnej
going to
gwarancji
tie in
państwa,
without
Skarb Państwa,
any
czy
state
państwa
treasury
tutaj
or Ministry of Agencies guarantee? Don't you see any problems where the technology providers would not be ready to involve their working capital and subscribe to a project which would be deprived of any guarantees from the state, rather than the state, just the companies? Like I said, the project is being pursued. This is a strategic option. As we announced in our 2016 strategy, the decision to exercise the strategic options will be made in 2020, and to start this, we have to finish the work in progress as of today, and secondly, we need to have more clarity about any EU regulations that at this moment are being negotiated or prepared, and all this will have an impact on our decisions. One more question perhaps about Dolna Odra. What does the situation look like? When is this gas unit going to be built? We assume that the first unit will be built in 2023. Thank you. Morning, Bartek Kopiński, Subchin. 4 questions, if I may. I would start with the green certificates, ENIA issues and ENERGA issues. And my interpretation, as you're writing about this, I have an interpretation that we expect advantageous or beneficial solutions of the ENERGA dispute. I think last week ENERGA was also very positive to the resolution of this issue. And the second thing I would like to ask is about the sales margin. I assume that this year we're still selling energy at last year's prices. Next year we're talking about an increase by roughly 20% in the wholesale market. And how can this translate into the margin for large distributors and G tariff? And would the regulator approve such a large increase in the wholesale market? And one more thing about the distribution employment. I've seen that they have increased by 5% on the old generation assets. Are we talking about some remuneration pressure or some coordination? And next thing about the funding of debt, a major proportion expires this year. And if we're talking about this with the market, can you see that the funding costs or any financing costs are growing? It used to be WIBOR plus, or is it still at the same level? So if you were more indebted, would more institutions be ready to fund coal? Well, let me relate to the first question. Mr. Wojtowicz will take the 3 remaining questions. It's true that we have a litigation with ENEA and ENERGA. We're convinced, and in line with our legal analyses, we're running major opportunities, and I think the counterparty has the same analysis, so they're all informing that they're on the
Nie
right
chciałbym
track.
tego bardziej komentować,
And I
dopóki
would
te,
really not like to
sprawy
comment on this anymore
sądowe nie
until
zostaną
the
zakończone.
litigation is finished,
Tym bardziej, że być może
including the
będzie
court case. Especially that
próba ugody,
there might be an attempt to
dowiecie
resolve
się,
it, to settle it in
wydarzy
an
z korzyścią
amicable
dla,
way if something
wszystkich stron.
new might
A jeżeli nie, no to
occur to the
decyzja
benefit of
sądu,
all the parties, and if not,
wtedy wszyscy
we
będziemy
will be
mieć
waiting for the court
jasność,
verdict, and then we'll have
które
a
analizy,
clarity
które
on
poczucie
which analyses and which of
dobrze
the
spełnionego
feelings
obowiązku
of
dla
a
swoich
duty
własnych
well performed
firm
towards
potrzebuje
their own
zarządzania.
respective companies the respective management boards have had.
O marży na
As regards
sprzedaży, czy
the sales margin on the sales, the margin
wykazujemy w
that
segmencie
we're
obrót jest
showing
to taka marża handlowca, prawda?
in the
To, że rośnie cena
distribution
energii, to może wcale tam
segment is a typically
widać
typical salesman margin.
marży, bo ona się bardziej
The increase in the prices might not be visible in the margin because this is going to be shown in the conventional and renewable energies, where the energy,
tam, gdzie energia jest wytwarzana,
where energy is generated
finalnych
rather than
sprzedawana, no,
when it's sold to the end consumers.
na rynku jest.
But there is some competition in the market.
Każdy wydawca stara się
So each
jak najlepiej sprzedać, zachowując
salesperson is trying to
rentowność.
sell as much as possible
Tak duży
while
wzrost cen energii
maintaining
może
its
spowodować,
profitability.
że niektórzy
Such a
sprzedawcy
high
tego nie wytrzymają.
energy
Jeśli
price increase might mean that some of the salespeople might fail to hold this if they enter the market with an open position. Next quarter might show it. As regards the employment
jeśli
costs,
powodem pytania był tam
if
slajd
your
dla
question was
segmentu
motivated by the slide for the
konwencjonalna, tam, gdzie
conventional
faktycznie wartość
generation slide, where indeed
14%,
the costs grow by above 10%,
jest to inna baza. Jest,
it's a different base we're talking about. In
jest to razem z
2018,
tymi aktywami.
we're talking here in line, it's slide 28, where it's only shown for the old assets. 28, that's renewable,
Okay,
conventional. Oh yes, you're right.
no tutaj to
Okay,
o
so
36
the
milionów, tak,
increase by 36 million, that's what you're talking about. That's about 5%.
No tak, i to tak, znaczy,
Well, yes.
Kwestia wzrostu płac.
Is it
nie jest to
a
kwestia
case
wzrostu
of salary increase?
osób. Także
No, that's related
jest
to the increase in the headcount.
kwestia wzrostu płac. Oczywiście
It's not related to the headcount. Indeed, it is related to a remuneration increase.
żadnych rezerw, to bardziej na
But
końcu roku ten
no
wynik jeszcze
provisions will be changed. Well, towards the end of the year, it could have been caused by some changes of actuarial
refinansowanie
provisions, but here indeed it is a case of increasing the
kontakt
remunerations. As regards the debt financing, the contacts with the market don't indicate
nie ma popytu
that
ze strony sektora
there is no demand
na
from the financial sector
kredyt PGE. Także
for PGE credit.
nie podpisałbym się pod
So I would not subscribe to a sentence stating that a limitation
ekspozycji
of, shall I say, the exposure
przez
to
instytucje
hard coal
finansowe
by some
powoduje,
financial institutions means that
przypomnę,
our
PGE to nie
costs
jest tylko
debt cost is growing. Let me remind you that PGE is not just coal. We are investing in various energy generation, power generation, and distribution sectors.
Mamy plany
We also
inwestycji
have
w
investment
kogenerację,
plans
która jest
into
traktowana
cogeneration, which
jako
is
nisko
treated
emisyjna,
as a
czy
low
która
emission
wreszcie
sector
patrzeć
or gas
w
or
perspektywie
going forward
offshore, a w
in offshore
bliższej
generation and in a
fotowoltaikę, czy
less
wiatr na
remote
lądzie,
direction into
outwind
photovoltaics
też.
or
Staramy się
onshore
pokazywać,
wind farms, so
że
we'll have such activities. Also, we're trying to
nie
show,
malować obrazu, że
we're trying not to paint a picture whereby PGE would only be shown as coal-based, and it seems to me that financial institutions understand this. As regards, unfortunately, the mic is off. I cannot hear it.
Już wracając do
Coming back
kwestii
to the
refinansowania, to
refinancing issue, the necessary refinancing in 2017 is 1.2 billion. That's slide 30. As regards settlements, amicable settlements that might take place this year, and you're talking about mutual benefits, that they might be mutually beneficial. I understand that for PGE this benefit is the return of opportunity costs, and for those companies that thought the contracts were not important, that would mean paying less penalties. For us, the contracts concluded are clear, and the conditions of those terms and conditions are clear. The price paths of defining revenues due to those contracts are clear.
Czy można jeszcze poprosić o jakąś ramę
Can we still ask you about some time frame where those settlements might be concluded? I wish it could be today, but it's not entirely up to us. Thank you. Grzegorz Witkowski and Cygnus. I have a simple question. I'm not sure if the answer is going to be simple. Whether the increase in the energy price covers all the costs, or in other words, is the spread maintained, expanded, or shrunk? And this involves another question, because you said that as you sell power, you buy CO2, and as regards coal, you mentioned that you didn't know what exactly the change in the coal price would be in 2019. So I understand the tricky part of this question is whether you secure the purchases of hard coal from the market or from related companies, and whether the coal price is part of your risk.
Staramy się tak sprzedawać
We try to sell
energię w
energy
warunkach, żeby
based on such conditions
ten spread nie
that
spadał.
our margin, our spread would not decrease.
Dążymy,
That's what we're trying to achieve,
spread w ciągu
to make sure that the average spread on the entire portfolio should be maintained. Let me remind you that we also have a large proportion of lignite-based generation, or paradoxically, or maybe not paradoxically, the increase in hard coal prices would benefit the profitability of lignite-based generation. So to wrap it up, as of today, you don't see any compression of the 2019 spread. In the prospects for 2019, we are trying in the forecast of 2019, we're trying to make sure that this spread, this margin would not drop.
Bo to zaawansowanie takie procentowanie
One more question perhaps about Opole, because the work progress
daleko posunięte.
in numerical terms is quite advanced, and plainly speaking, when can we expect the first energy generated there? When are you going to sell the first? The commissioning deadline for unit number 5 is
W naszym przekonaniu
April
ten termin będzie docelowy.
30th next year, and in our opinion, this deadline will be kept. Thank you. Will be observed.
Nie widzę więcej pytań.
I don't see any other questions from the room since
Byli zaskakująco zgodni z
the
pytaniami, które zadała sala.
people browsing the web were very much aligned to what was asked, and we'll take all the other questions by email, address them. Thank you very much for coming. Those of you in front of the computers, we also wish to thank you for your participation. You're all invited in August for the first semester of 2018. Thank you very much. Thank you.